You're welcome back to Breakfast Central. Civic-tech organization BudgIT has raised a red flag over the federal government's 2025 budget proposal, citing a staggering 6.7 trillion gap in Nigeria's projected revenue, exposing a glaring discrepancy between the Medium-Term Expenditure Framework and the finance minister's claims. While the MTEF report shows 13.6 trillion revenue collected by July 2025 and 20.39 trillion naira spent, the finance minister insists only 10.7 trillion has been generated, sparking urgent calls for clarity.
Well, according to the MTEF tables, the total 2025 budgeted revenue was 40.88 trillion naira, with pro-data figures up to July expected at 23.85 trillion naira. Actual revenue, however, lagged far behind at 13.65 trillion naira. Retained revenue from oil and non-oil sources totaled 12.36 trillion naira, while earnings from oil-related activities such as dividends, rents and royalties fell significantly below projections. BudgIT's intervention reflects growing concern over transparency and fiscal management in 2025. That's why we have today joining us the co-founder of BudgIT, who's here with us to discuss and take a look at the 2026 budget. We have Mr. Oluseun Onigbinde joins us live, especially via video conferencing. Thank you so much for making our time to speak with us this morning and to millions of Nigerians.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here on News Central.
Great. I think the first question every Nigerian wants to know is, why are we presenting a budget when they do not have how the previous budgets were spent in terms of figures, numbers, and the likes? First question. Second question, transparency or differences between what the Minister of Finance said and what the President said. How do you juxtapose all of this in that presentation on Friday?
I mean, that's a great question. Thank you so much. And I think I will start with the fact that in recent times, the budget has always been making that clear claim that something is technically wrong with our budget system. And you will see, we have been running multiple budgets in recent time. We've had the 2023, 2024, 2025 budget sometimes running concurrently. And so that's the first anomaly. So right now we are using 2025 revenues to fund capital projects in 2024. Something that's not happened in recent times. Let's not forget the previous administration led by Muhammadu Buhari did everything to streamline the budget into a January to December cycle. But when this government came on board, they just sitting all of that. But the president in his 2026 budget speech said that they were moving forward in that. So we have a structural problem with the budget process, and I guess that's even where we start. And that's why you find either the discrepancies in the numbers, because number one, we do not have the budget implementation report as of now, December. We should have at least 3 budget implementation reports should have been published as our Q3. 2025 budget implementation report should have been published, but now we don't even have any. So whatever we are even getting in terms of budget implementation report is what we screenshot or take from the MTEF document that was presented by the government to the National Assembly. So the former detailed implementation report of the 2025 budget is not available. And I think the president even mentioned that less than 20% of the capex for 2025 has been released. So obviously, release does not even mean has been utilized. So you might even assume that less than 10% has been utilized as of date. So there's a huge problem in now the finances or the fiscal structure of the government has been done. The other thing you also get is that the revenue side, there is discrepancy. So the federal government said, we have a revenue as of July. The minister said that we did somewhere around 10 trillion naira, which was a comment he made last week. Whereas, if you look at the MTEF document, the government is claiming a revenue of around 18 trillion naira as of July this year. So the question is that who do we believe? Do we believe the MTEF document or the position of the Minister of Finance? So those are the discrepancies. But the budget implementation report is an authoritative document that should have given us all of these fine details and should have brought clarity into the structure of the budget, but we do not have that. And it speaks to even the declining transparency and accountability within the Nigerian fiscal structure.
All right, and again, I mean, you've talked about the budget implementation report. There should be, we expected reports, quarterly reports about this, and if we do not have access to budget implementation report, what is the implication of this?
The implication of this is it's an abuse of the Fiscal Responsibility Act. So there's a Fiscal Responsibility Act that is supposed to, explains to us that there are timelines to delivery of these quarterly implementation reports, and by not adhering to that, the federal government is flouting its own rules that are supposed to guide the fiscal development of this country. That's number one. The second thing is, how do we even appraise a budget? The budget in 2024 was wrongly extended to 2025. If you extend for 3 months, that's fine. But if you start extending till the 12th month of the year after, then definitely there is a huge problem. So the implementation report that should have been released means that we can't even appraise the 2025 budget, because let's break it down again here. When we say the 2025 budget is not performing, it's the capital expenditure side that is not performing. The recurrent side continues to perform because salaries are still being paid, wires of government are still being run, debt service for the creditors and the debtors, all of those arrangements are still being delivered. So definitely, we still have a country that is still being run on the recurring side, on the current revenues. The challenge is on the capital side, where we have not even implemented anything in the 2025 budget. And we have also said that this is also an evidence of gross fiscal indiscipline. For example, a lot of things in the 2025 budget, 2024 budget, were not supposed to be implemented. If you have implemented your priority by the end of 2024, whatever you don't implement, you either pick out of them, consolidate them into a supplementary budget, and introduce it into 2025. So you can have a 2025 budget and a 2025 supplementary budget, or you can even have a revised 2025 budget. So it'd be like you had the initial budget that was signed. In 3 months after, you can have a revised budget, so that you continue in that direction. But this habit of we rolling over has destroyed one of the key fundamentals of Nigeria's fiscal structure.
Yes, and very importantly, and that brings me to this question, is this opacity strategy or a failure because the budget is late, is inconsistent, and oftentimes contradictory? And we heard Mr. President on Friday. He said that the era of running multiple budgets with the overlaps is going to end, and that elicited a lot of round of applause. But the question is, I mean, people are saying, look, this thing started in your administration. So have we reached the point where we can, now that the president said he's going to stop it, have we reached a point where we can start on a clean slate and start doing things properly? Because billions are budgeted to the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. Nigerians do deserve to know how every hard-earned naira of their taxpayers' monies are spent. But what we often see is this opacity, and it's just a mess.
I like what you just said. It's firstly what we are first grappling with. I'll put them in different dimensions. First thing is a revenue credibility issue. In 2023, we had around 12 trillion naira in revenue at the federal level. In 2024, the revenues jumped to 20 trillion. Now, you might assume that you could raise, and not forget that the jump in 2024, this devaluation effect kicked in, especially on the oil revenue side. Federal government now took that liberty and said in 2025 we're going to generate 40 trillion. So you wanted to move from 12 to 20 to 40 trillion, when you know that there were some certain events in 2020 that accounted for that significant jump. Now we have a revenue credibility. So the federal government has budget on paper, but it does not have the resources to finance it. And if you look at it, so that is where the problem starts having problem, a revenue credibility problem. The second thing you get is also a weak institution. So for example, even if politicians want to do whatever they like, you as an institution is supposed to restrain them and move them backwards. You inserting over 10,000 projects but trillions of naira is not going to fly because we do not have the revenues currently to back down. And put the numbers together. We have a revenue, maybe even this year we end up with a revenue of maybe 25 trillion naira. Let's even say we are that generous. We are going to spend around 17 trillion, around 15 to 16 trillion on servicing public debt. So already out of your 25 trillion, you already spent 15 trillion servicing public debt. Then you're going to pay salaries, another 8 trillion naira on paying salaries, pensions, and the rest. Then the rest of the money, you're still going to run overheads, you're still going to run statutory transfers. So it's in your best interest to have a very disciplined budget, especially a disciplined capital expenditure plan that knows that the only thing the federal government is funding are things that align with its priorities. So once you don't have a disciplined budget revenue projection, you don't have a disciplined capital expenditure plan, then you continue to borrow to meet that plan. This is what causes lopsided, and then you have weak institutions that are not able to push back. And remember when Dr. Okonjo-Iweala was Minister of Finance, and how she made the budget like this is an important document. This is the summation of our intention towards Nigerians. And so there was huge budget discipline in those directions. But nowadays, it feels like the National Assembly just says, this, we want to do this, and the executive does not push back. The budget office does not push back. At the end of the day, we have a lopsided budget that is big on the numbers, but we do not have the resources to implement it. Then what do? We keep borrowing. Look at the 2026 budget, for example. We are planning to generate a 34 trillion naira budget. I mean, in the proposed budget, 34 trillion naira revenue is what we are trying to generate. Then deficit of 23 trillion naira. I mean, where does that make sense? That your deficit to revenue ratio is around 70%. So I want to make 34 naira and I want to borrow 23 naira. How does that make sense? Why not? So you're supposed to make that adjustment on the capital side so that as you begin to raise more revenue, you begin to raise more of the capital spending. And you target your capital spending on what actually matters, what actually is in the best interest of most Nigerians, not what fulfills your own personal agenda. And those are the lopsided arrangement that we're getting in the budget. And we're asking ourselves, we cannot move forward with this kind of approach of how we do public spending or public budgeting. So my own push is, it's not just it's intentional for them not to be transparent. It's because there are some structural weaknesses that continue to, escalate these issues. And that's one. And two, they are the institution, the capacity of the institution to even push back and set everybody right and be like an adult in the room. It's no longer there as it used to be.
Quite sad to hear that, especially coming from you and BudgIT that's taking time to detail all of these things, especially on your social media account. It's also scary at the same time. Do you think the National Assembly has become complicit at a certain percent or a time? Because normally we're expecting that they would be able to query these budgets and be able to put it right. And I also want to ask, what has happened to fuel subsidy? What has happened to floating of the naira? Are these things, do they have any impact on the budget at all? Because Nigerians also want to know. I mean, you floated the naira. You also mentioned that
the savings they made from subsidy.
Yeah. So where is it? Where is it in the budget?
Yeah, you're very, very right on that. And I will take you on that Nigerians want to see answers because things have gotten on the right side and on the very wrong side. And if you look at the first subsidy, the first problem with first subsidies is that we could no longer afford it. And since we could no longer afford it, what we continuously did was to borrow it. So our position in budget when it comes to removal of first subsidies, that it's not a question of we want or no, it's just that we can no longer afford it. And also because the gross opacity around it gated enough opportunity for fraud and abuse. So for example, there was a volume integrity problem. How much fuel was crossing the border because it's far cheaper. Fuel was far cheaper in Nigeria. And we're now taking euro bonds to pay for first subsidy. We use excess crude accounts to pay for first subsidy. We took savings to pay for first subsidy. The revenues that were supposed to attribute to the federal government, CBN will just, NNPC will just come at some point and says, no, we have to defray on that recovery or whatever they called it at that time. So So the first problem is that we no longer had that money. So it was much as if we were even borrowing money or taking from savings to cover that shortfall. The second thing also you say is that the devaluation of the currency has been at the gross advantage to the government in terms of revenues. Let's not lie, states are now swimming in money. In recent times, you had states that were having 6 trillion, 7 trillion monthly FAC allocation. That has doubled to almost 18 trillion naira FAC allocation. Almost every state in Nigeria has had their FAC allocation doubled in the last 2 years. So it's very realistic. It's clear that the biggest gains from this fuel subsidy removal and from this whole devaluation of the currency has been the government itself, because now they have more money on their pocket. The challenge is that, has that translated to development? It has not at the scale at which it should have. Number one is that there is no properly targeted social protection mechanism that should have happened. Now, even if you don't have a lot of savings from first subsidy, because you never even had the money in the first place, you were just borrowing and taking from different sources just to keep things going. What happens to the fact that there are now exchange rate gains that are incredibly significant? What happens in which you warehousing that and saying, we're going to put this into a social protection budget that helps most Nigerians, or we're going to put this into a rural agricultural program where we know that most Nigerians in rural communities or peri-urban communities that they invest in, that they function in. So there has been no targeted mechanism from the government side to really ameliorate the current sufferings that have come based on those twin policies, from the devaluation of the currency or the removal of fuel subsidy. It's more like just get on the program. We'll do a few pockets of things there, but nothing has been concerted and holistic in terms of. I mean, let's not forget, we used to have Shopi. In fact, even in the Buhari era, we still even had a plan to be able to engage after the post-COVID era, but we don't have any of such now. So for me, I felt the government is not. There's no structured approach into how it's engaging citizens, or has I been able to ensure that most of this suffering are stepped back. And it's not just a federal government problem alone. Even state governments act as if when it comes to social protection, it's none of their business. So everything you hear in Nigeria is that the Federal Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs. Now I'm asking, where is the State Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs? Because it seems everybody in the states now want to build a new airport, want to build a new conference center, want to build a new state government house, want to fix a new few urban roads. Nobody's thinking structurally to say the agricultural people in my state that face the brunt of food inflation, how do I support them? The traders that need low level cost credit, how do I enable a system for them to benefit from that? I'm going to be able to make sure that not just a minimum wage, but a decent living wage that is realistic with the current devaluation. That nobody's been able to, at the state level, to bring those sort of things forward. It's just more money in my pocket, a little bit there for the workers, and now most of them are engaging in these grandiose capital projects. So there's something dysfunctional in how the effects of the twin policies of the federal government has been handled. Yeah.
I just wanted to cut in there. I mean, we talked about infrastructure, agriculture, and so on, but during the presentation, the president also promised that he was going to cultivate 1 million, if I'm right, 1 million hectares of land. In 2024, presentation 2025, he said he was going to cultivate, 500,000. And in 2023, during his live broadcast, he also said he was going to do so with mechanized farming. Although, according to sources, even from journalists, they say they haven't seen it yet. So, don't you think maybe we should just cut the presidency some slack? Maybe 2026 budget would find that happening. I mean, just to put it out there.
Yeah, we hopefully. By the time I'm sure by next week or this week, we are in a new week, so we expect that the proposed budget will be made public and will be shared publicly. So in that sphere, we could maybe see the details of the 2026 budget. So there we can see truly if there are plans to really, farm with million hectares and all of that. But that's an ambitious goal. honestly. The Niger State governor, was also making those kind of demands. What we have seen is that we have not gotten anything at that level of scale. And when you're looking at that numbers, you have to look at how much mechanization you need to bring to the table, how much seed science you need to bring to the table, how much investment in agro processing has to come on board. So agriculture is not child's play. It's not something you do, within our own electoral cycle where we are interested now and we do a anchor borrowers fund, and another 3 years we abandon it, then we go back and say, okay, we have something called renewed hope again. There has to be a long-term structured planning as a country. This is what we want to do in the next 10 years. Whoever is president, that Buhari, Tinubu, or otherwise, follows those patterns and those structure. Because we are in the agricultural market globally, is a very, very competitive market. And I don't think he's thinking about just production just for the local economy anymore. A 1 million hectare production is not just for local consumption. It means we also want to export, we want to boost agricultural export. And that means we will have to be very, very competitive.
Now, Mr. Onigbinde, we've seen, these budget rituals that we go through every other year, it's almost looking like a copy and paste system, and we go over the same thing. Budgets should be planned, it should be deliberate based on research and development, it should be data-driven, it should be deliberate. But what we're seeing now is just, it's a hopeful piece of paper. It's more aspirational. We wish to do this. It doesn't even confront with reality. And this brings me to my question. Next year is the penultimate year before a general election. We know how important politics is in Nigeria, and the tax laws will come into effect in 10 days' time. How much difference will the implementation of the new tax laws make in terms of revenue shortfall? And also, do you see the political climate in the country affecting the implementation of the budget in one way or the other?
There are a few things to consider. One is the budget will continue. There will be a bit of aggression on the capital expenditure next year, just because government has to show up. They have to do something. They need to bring more evidence to the table that they are working in the best interest of Nigeria. So we should expect more aggression on the capital side, which also means more borrowings, which also means that maybe the federal government at some point some of its reforms might be under a threat, and especially the idea that they would no longer go to the CBN to take money like as it was done by former President Muhammadu Buhari's administration, which means that's something to watch out for, because if you keep budgeting significant sums, you have your 2025 budget has close to another 20 trillion naira capital project that you have not delivered. You want to roll over most of that into the new year, and so you have 25 trillion capex to spend. Even if you execute 15 trillion out of 25 trillion capex, it means you are likely borrowing another 20 trillion next year. It's a huge sum to bring to the table. So I feel like one of the things to watch out for is if the federal government will have fidelity to its idea that it will no longer treat the CBN as its piggy bank. The other thing also to watch out for, apart from the increased capital spending, is also the exchange rate. As we know, most of retail money retail FX might be under threat, because a lot of people would conduct this political business in FX. So we'll see how much of that will impact on the currency itself as we go into the new year. Also, the oil market, if Russia and Ukraine finally
Okay, we unfortunately have run out of connection with Mr. Onigbinde, but it's been quite an interesting conversation. Thank you very much for joining us to look at the budget, the discrepancies within the budget, and what the expectations are. I think a final, if you can, in 20 seconds, how can citizens, budget has called for more public involvement in being able to track this process. How can citizens be more involved?
I think we should build more engagement on the budget. We should not just shy away from it. When the proposed budget is out, we'll analyze, we'll bring it out. 2026.
Network once again. not allowing us to wrap up that conversation. But thank you so much, co-founder of BudgIT, Mr. Oluseun Onigbinde, for joining us and breaking it down.